With this episode number 6, I will conclude the tutorial series about extending Pano2VR with JavaScript. For this tutorial, I have set up a little project with Pano2VR. You see one point inside of this little virtual tour. We are here in Vienna, in the capital of Austria, and this is the Schönbrunn Palace. It is an old imperial palace in the western part of the city, and I have taken a very special approach for this project. Let me explain it a little bit with Google Maps. Here's Schönbrunn, the center of Vienna. Here we have the Schönbrunn Castle, and Schönbrunn is a very large area, which is this dotted outline here. And we have the palace itself. This is this area. And we have the large palace garden. The northern part is a very nicely structured and really baroque garden. It's really huge. And in the southern part we have some wilder areas. And here we have the so-called Grand Parterre. It is a flat area, and at the borders of this area we have a series of statues. It is about this area. And this is what we want to cover in this tutorial. What is this about? We can see some statues here and some marble figures with goddesses and gods of antique times and some heroes from the Greek and the Roman history and a very classical sculptors' artworks. And we have one row at the eastern side of this Grand Parterre we are standing in here, and we have a row at the western edge of this area. As you can see, we have some hotspots here. These ones are for moving, and these ones are for some explanations, some informations about what this statue is showing, or who is depicted here. Let's click on it, and you'll see we have some information and an image of this figure and the statue, and we can have some explanations here, and we have a link leading to more explanations on Wikipedia. We can close this, and the interactivity is pretty simple. When I'm moving to another point and I click on a statue, on a hotspot of a statue, then it opens. The content is changed if I'm clicking on another statue. If I close it, then the map will take off all the space of the left sidebar, and the same it is if I'm opening the box and I'm moving. The box is also closed and again covered by the map. So the map is pretty detailed. It is not Google Maps. It is some local map provider with larger resolution. It's some open data, and it is provided by the federal authorities. So and we can move around here, and sometimes we have, let's move to the corner here. So we have some figures where we have two statues close together, or two persons, two figures combined in one statue. Here we have Janus, the two-headed god, and Bellona, the goddess of war in the Romans. And so we have two parts of information here. So that is what we see and what we can visit here. And the main topic of this tutorial is to show a procedure how we can get content into this box here. Of course, you can do this all into some node hotspots or into some info hotspots, and there are a lot of ways to do this inside of the Pano2VR desktop app. We choose another approach here because this content here, it is not embedded into the Pano2VR tour project. It is retrieved from an external data source, and what we see here is content directly retrieved from Wikipedia. And this is a pretty simple, but I hope a very instructive example for a very widespread general procedure used in web technologies. And we have an interface between a Pano2VR project and an external data resource. And that's what this tutorial is about how to connect Pano2VR with a little bit JavaScript to such external data connections. This is a simple use case here with fetching public data from Wikipedia. It is free, it is publicly available. And this is only one example. You can do whatever you can imagine. Think of an online shop and you are retrieving product data here, or you are moving around in a technical environment and you have some details in a, let's say in a workshop or in an industry site, and you have explanations for education and so on, and you get explanations about the parts of this industry site here in the sidebar, or it can also be attached to these hotspots, you name it. It is very much extendable. We are mainly focused here in this tutorial about how this data connection works and how you can fire up a call from clicking here to getting the data into here. That's what this tutorial is about. We have some similar use cases in former tutorials, but here I'm concentrating on a generally used and widely available standardized interface between 2 points where we need data in our tour or in any other web project and to get the data from somewhere else in a standardized procedure. I mentioned already some use cases for such a procedure, and I will extend this a little bit. There are a lot of advantages using such a separation of the presentation, and let's title the virtual tour here with all the interface and all the interactivity as the presentation layer of our project, and let's entitle this part here with the explanations and the informations about the status as a content layer. And usually in smaller Pano2VR project you have these 2 layers in one project. You are entering all these image URLs or the text boxes or links and so on in the appropriate fields in the hotspot properties or in the user data of a node, and you deliver a completely self-contained project. But when projects are getting larger, it may be interesting to concentrate the content externally with some very big advantages. Maybe the content can be edited from an external site, from your client or from multiple persons. And you can set up Pano2VR as a scaffolding and getting the content from somewhere else. And there are a lot of use cases. I mentioned already an online shop where you can connect a virtual tour to your online shop with all the product data, pricing and so on, and product images, and you can retrieve this data from your online shop into Pano2VR. And the technique we will discuss in this tutorial is the usage of the so-called REST API. I will explain it in detail later. And this REST API is a very common interface between projects where it comes to transferring data from two different servers or websites. And you can have the data source from nearly everywhere because the format the data is exchanged between 2 parts is highly standardized, and you can, for example, use a content management system as a data provider for your Pano2VR project. So maybe this can be a part of a WordPress site. And WordPress is delivering data if you want it, and if you set it up alike, you can have a data delivery from a WordPress site in a format that can Pano2VR use. Or it can be, let's name another example, it can be a Google sheet where maybe your client and his employees are entering content and you display this content here in your virtual tour. So this is working at the runtime, so nobody of the participants of such a project need to have Pano2VR. The project is already online, but the content stays editable. And this is a huge advantage, and you have a strictly separation between content and presentation. With larger projects, you can externalize data. Maybe your project is running on your server, but the content and maybe it's data intensive, is running from completely somewhere else, so you don't have to worry about your traffic and comes from elsewhere. And it is meant as a blueprint. This tutorial is really kind of a blueprint for this data interfacing between two sites and how it is set up. And it's not really difficult because it is highly standardized and it is living for a long time in the web, and some of the most important technical foundations of modern web technology, what I'm using here. And so this project is set up as simple as possible, but as complex as it's needed. It's sometimes a bit abstract, but I will explain it in detail how this is working, how we get this up and running with our Pano2VR tool and make it retrieve data from Wikipedia using the mentioned REST API interfacing. I just mentioned two words which need some detailed explanation. We are using an interfaces between our project and the data source of Wikipedia, which is called REST API. And so both are abbreviations, so let's check what they are really meaning. What is an API? What is REST? And there are some pretty abstract concepts behind it, but I want to keep it as simple as possible. And I had some bookmarks for you. And let's start with an API. The API is an application programming interface, and an API is basically, it is a procedure to make programs connect to each other and exchange data in both directions. These protocols need to be understood by both parts of this project. So in our example, we need to make sure that Pano2VR is sending the right commands to Wikipedia so that Wikipedia knows what do they want from me, and then delivers data in a format Pano2VR, or what we will program now, understands. So they need an understanding in both directions. This hotspot sends a command to Wikipedia, a request, a so-called request, and the response, these are two very important words, request, response. Nearly the whole web is basically only request, response, and the response is the data delivered from some server, and the request is send a command to a server. One click of the hotspot makes Pano2VR send a request to the Wikipedia REST API interface, and the Wikipedia server delivers the data. Pano2VR accepts this data, retrieves it, and makes it fitting the format I have decided for styling here in this box. So that's the basic procedure we have here, and which we want to cover in this tutorial. So API is a programming interface between two points, a server or the browser, or between two servers, or between a server and some other devices, whatever. It is just for making two parts exchanging data understand each other. This is an API. Now let's come over to the next more specific part of the web API. This is more specific than the general API explanation because the web API relies on the hypertext transfer protocol, means HTTP, what we all know as a prefix of a web URL. So it is a web protocol basically. So all data need to be exchanged via web protocol. That is pretty simple and doesn't need further explanation, but I want to make this distinction to get a little bit more detail. So we are using a web API, but simply talking about APIs. And the next part is the magic word REST. REST is a pretty abstract concept, and the REST stands for representational state transfer, which is a completely abstract word here, and it is not possible to really explain it in this tutorial. It basically defines the way how a request to a server is processed to give a proper answer to the starting point from where we have the request sent. So usually it's a browser, and in the browser our Pano2VR project, and this sends a command to via web API to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has a REST interface, And there are certain procedures how this data is exchanged. I don't want to go into technical details here. And we get something back from this server. And all this is defined with this REST procedure. And it is very roughly explained now. And don't take it too serious what I'm saying here, because I'm not an IT guy. I'm a web developer and panoramic photographer. So, but it is okay to know this and not to go too much into detail. We simply want to get this to work. After we have got an idea about this interfacing process between 2 points, our project here or the browser, and an external data source like Wikipedia on this side, we now need to talk about how the data is looking like we are receiving from Wikipedia. There we have a data standard which is pretty common, and it is very useful for such purposes. So let's go to the next point in my bookmarks list, and this is JSON. JSON is an abbreviation for JavaScript object notation, and it's a data format. It is standardized and is extremely widely used, and it has a simple syntax. And if you're going to syntax, you see how it is made. It usually consists of curly braces, and inside of a curly brace we have pairs. These are so-called key-value pairs. This is a key, and this is a data called value. If you have strings, everything is in quotation marks. If you have booleans, true or false, this is written in plain text, and numbers are written as numbers. Everything else is a string. You only have these 3 data types. All keys can be written with quotation marks. It's a clean way, but you can omit it. And you have the possibility to nest it. So we have here first name John, and we have the age, and we have true. And here we have address as key, but the value is not a string, a boolean, or a number, but it is a new JSON object. It's called an object. And every object is surrounded by a curly brace. And so you can nest it as much as you like. This is an object with 4 keys, and the values are all strings. And it goes on here the same way. And here we have a 4th data type. It is null. That is a not object. It is kind of empty or 0, but usually it's not there, but it is marked with a key so you can fill it up later. And this is pretty simple. It is pretty much readable what the data is about. But JSON is widespread standardized as the language a REST API is talking from and to. So what we are doing here, we're sending a request to the Wikipedia URL, and Wikipedia sends back JSON. And we will have a look at it in the next clip after this basic explanation what JSON is. Now let's have a closer look at how the data is looking like we want to retrieve. So I'm heading over to Wikipedia. I have picked up a random example. Let's say this is uranium. It is a metallic element in the periodic system of elements, and you can take any other element. What you see here is the result, the response of a request I sent to Wikipedia via my browser to this URL. This is the request, and this is what I'm getting back. And if I'm having a look at the source code of this article here, just type Command or Control U, and you see the source code. You have the return. It is HTML with a head and so on, and a lot of meta stuff. Then we have the body, and where the body starts, we have the visible content, and so on. It is pretty much readable. You will find the visual counterparts of this code on the front end of the website and so on. I don't scroll to everything here. And we have a lot of formatting here and structuring with body, header, div, nav, and so on. And so this HTML code is a mixture of content data, and a lot of formatting and some utility code for, let's say, social media. Here we have the code for display in Facebook posts and so on. There's a lot of other stuff around, and it's a mixture of data, utilities, and a lot of formatting. You see here we have a lot of CSS classes, so it is delivered and readily rendered data. Now let's have a look how this article looks like in JSON. And that's the key to what we want to have from Wikipedia when we click on a statue hotspot and we want to have this in our formatting, and we only need the data. Basically, we want to have this part here, not all this stuff around. We don't need a menu or all these helper tools here on the side. So we only need the data. So let's head over to the JSON data, and you see it is a completely other display. It is not formatted at all. Basically it looks like this. It is only data, starting with a curly brace and ending with a curly brace and so on. And you see some HTML code here inside, because HTML code can be a value in a JSON string. And so we have it in the raw data as it is transported over the wire, and this is the structured display. Most browsers have a built-in structured display of JSON data because it's so widespread, and it is way better readable if you have it in this format, because you can see all the numbers in green, strings are violet, and the keys are blue, and you see the structure with the nesting. You can fold, unfold it, so it is pretty nice to read. And this is the same data you see on this article, but this is without any formatting. It is only distinguished by numbers, strings, and booleans, and nothing else. So you can have this data naked, and you can do your own formatting on it. And it is very compact, as you see. When you see the raw data, it is a pretty short text, way shorter than you see the readily rendered HTML page. And so this is what we want to have from Wikipedia. And you see we have a certain address here. This is the URL of the article, and this is a URL of this so-called endpoint, where we need to come back later to explain what an endpoint is and how can I reach this endpoint. This is public as well, but you need to find it and you need how to get there. This is the public web interface, the web front end. Front end is another word used for the presentation of data in the web browser, where the web browser displays HTML, and this front end is made for HTML, and the JSON data isn't made for a front end yet. So you feed this data into your own presentation and your own front end. So this is a basic comparison between HTML and JSON and how this is looking like. And now we need to explain how to get there. The next point we need to take care about is, where do we get what data from an REST API, a so-called endpoint? An endpoint is an URL where you get data after you send a request to a server and its REST API interface. So now let's check how to find these endpoints in Wikipedia. It's of course, and it's a reason why I choose Wikipedia as an example, because it's very nicely documented. Let's go to my bookmarks here. So we have the REST API of MediaWiki. MediaWiki is a technical website, and Wikipedia is one part of this project, and the Wikipedia people externalized all these technical services to MediaWiki, also the media handling, all the images and all the data. And it's a little bit like the technical backstage area of Wikipedia. And here it is explained how this API works and how to get your stuff. And what is interesting for us is the API reference. And if you want to have some more details or some introduction about how this is working, you can go to Quick Start, and then you get some more explanations how that is working. But we are heading over to this part, and we are going to the API reference. And now let's check how we can go ahead here. And here we have an example for a search result object. This is what we get if you are going to find a certain file. Here is an image file. And here you see the JSON object returned from the server. And it is one object. And here we have one sub object. It is the thumbnail, and so and with a short description on it. It's pretty much readable and understandable. So now let's get a step further, and that's where we are here. So I've bookmarked my steps how to go there. And here we have a so-called sandbox. A sandbox is a kind of a playground where you can check technologies without programming something, just to take a look how to get the data in this case, and how we find stuff. And here we have some examples how to get some data from this interface, and you see that the URL of this data is kind of a description what you get from there. And here you can get HTML, you get some errors, or you get some version information and so on. And there is another point here. I put these URLs later in the description. And here we have the Wikipedia sandbox, and here we have some examples. Here we have the choose the API to explore, and this is the Wikipedia REST API. We have the Wikimedia REST API, some mathematical functions which are accessible via this API, but this is what is interesting for us. And here we can go a little bit further, and we are coming close to what we like to have. This is a server. It is only the only one available, and we have here some page. If you want to see what's coming out here, here's the example and how it's formatted and so on, and you can click on get to close it again here. And what we like, I have scrolled on to all these items here and to find the best for our project here, and it is the summary. And the summary is delivering a short excerpt of the article, just enough to have our room here filled with some short explanation. I don't want to have the whole article, and I want to have a short but informational extract of the article, and that's what we're getting here. Here are the technical details of all this process between my request and Wikipedia's response, and possible errors and so on, how they are handled, how they are formatted. It's technical, very much going into the details here, but we don't need to know this here. But this is our so-called endpoints. That's what we see here. Page, summary, and then we have the title. While the title is the same string as we have the title in our example. So when I'm going back to my first example of this chemical element, let's head over again to uranium. This is the article here, and if I'm going to my example with the JSON output, then you see how this URL is formatted. This is a base URL. This is a basic server en wikipedia.org API REST version 1. Usually APIs are identified by versions because they evolve over the time, and then you see it here. Then the rest of the URL is page/summary/title, and this is exactly what we have here: page, summary, and then you have the title, and then you get this. And we only need a part of it, and what we need later is extract HTML, and we need the formatted title, and we need this description and we need the link to the article. This is what here we have in content URL, the desktop page. This is a link we want to use later as a backlink from our display in the sidebar box back to Wikipedia. So this link is meant here. So now we have an idea how to get to the data we want to have for our project and the URL which need to be fired when we are clicking on such an hotspot here. After this introduction covering the technical basics of our project, now let's go to the Pano2VR project, and I have now switched from the finished version to the starting version where everything is prepared so that we can concentrate on the topic of this tutorial. So what I have prepared now is the bare bone project here. You don't see any formatting here, and if I click on a statue, then you will get an empty box. The map is working and everything else what is covered by the naked Pano2VR project. Now let's head over to Pano2VR to show the project a little bit more in detail how it's set up. So what you see here, we have the 7 panoramas of the park where we can move on here, just using the Alt Option key to move around here in the Pano2VR viewer. And you see some white panoramas here with all the statues. And you see we have node hotspots here also at the statues. How it is made and why these are not informational hotspots but node hotspots is a little trick. You can do it, but you don't need to, but it has some practical advantages. What I have done is I have placed dummy panoramas over the head of every statue. There are some neat tricks you can do in Pano2VR. All these panoramas here, you see the satellite icon. The panoramas are geolocated, and I have done it for the figures as well. I will explain it later a bit more in detail. First, let's have a look at the skin. It is pretty easy, and it is bare bone. It has no controller, no navigation bars, no nothing. I have just a location bar here where you have the user data title, so I can see where I am in the tour. We have a box here. It is the so-called wiki box. That is where I want to throw in my content later. And we have a map container, and the map container is set to 20% height, and you see the basic structure here. If this wiki is activated, it will rise to 100%, and it is made from the bottom. So in fact the wiki box is always visible, and the map is covering the box when it is activated. So the box is always present, and the advantage is if I want to load some data in, it is already there. I don't need to open it. It is already there, and it is covered by the map container. Here we have some actions, mostly regarding the visibility of the wiki box and the behavior of the map. You see I have a custom map here, base map, and everything else is pretty much straightforward. The node hotspot is opening the next panorama, and if I'm clicking on the node hotspot, you can already see it here. Let's see it in the browser. So if I'm opening the box and I'm going to another location, the box is automatically closed. That's everything what this node hotspot is currently doing. And this is it pretty much. Nothing very special, no rocket science, a bare bone skin where we want to implement all the functions we need to get this Wikipedia data into the wiki box. That's the basic structure of the project. And in the next clip, I want to show how I made the statues and the geolocation thing to place them very easily. Now let me shortly explain why I'm using this concept of dummy nodes. It is a pretty nice concept compared to using ordinary hotspots. The description of the statue can easily be replaced by an info hotspot or something like that. But I choose to use a dummy node. The dummy node has a simple dummy panorama. It is 6 by 8 pixels. This is extremely small. And they are just blank. They have no function as to be there. They are never displayed. And they can never be jumped to, but they have geolocation. And if I'm heading over to the tour map, here we have all the nodes in the tour. Then we have the panorama nodes here as we walk along this row of statues. And we have here the nodes with the statues. And the simple trick is you need to place this node here just by drag and drop onto the map. You can see them clearly here because it's a very high resolution map. You can pretty clearly see them here. And when in this node the user data is asked, then you can check it here by using the altitude data. And if you click here, then you are asked what capture height of meters is it. And I entered not the usual 1.6 or 1.8 meters for the eye level. I entered, I think, 7 or 8 meters above ground. So they have the exact location, but they are elevated. The only prerequisite you need for this is to go to the project settings at the project user data, and you need to tick this box. And if you now have a hotspot, you can click on the map to place it, and then it gets the geolocation data. And if you're going to the user data, then click on the altitude button here with the satellite symbol, then it is retrieving the data, and then you can add your tripod height to it after you click it here. And then in the images, these dummy node hotspots are usually placed above. They were originally they would be placed here, but with 6 or 7 meters above, they are placed above the heads. Neat trick you can use here, but you need to activate the altitude sensitivity for displaying the hotspots of other nodes. You see here a suggested ghost hotspot of this statue. It is placed nearly above the head. It needs only a little bit tweaking, but they are already placed near the perfect location. This is the point why I'm using dummy hotspots, and you see here you have the connections only in light blue arrows. You see the little bit bent, so there is some tweaking necessary, maybe, especially if this is placed on a plain ground with no details where I can place it exactly. And data retrieved from my iPhone for every capture are not as precise as I hope them to be. But it is a pretty much nice layout and close to the final state, so minimal tweaking is required, but not very much. And so you can use this trick with dummy nodes. It is also extensible to, let's say, mountain summits or something like that, where you want to have some elements in your panorama which are geolocated but not real nodes where you can jump to. And another use case for using dummy nodes is they are on the map, as you see. And so you can have a map with some other elements than nodes. Let's say you are in a city and you want to place some hotels, and you can use some dummy nodes for the hotels you never jump to, but they are only used for display here on the map. To distinguish the nodes, it is very important to use tags, because the dummy nodes of the statues themselves won't never be accessible. So I need to have tags, and if I'm going to the user data and scroll down, you see my normal panoramas have the tag real, underscore real, user underscore, so it stands on top in lists. And here in another panorama they have underscore statue, so they can easily filter them, and I can use them in logic blocks because the hotspots need to do different things. Hotspots from one panorama to each other need to be used to jump from each other. Hotspots to such a dummy node are not meant to have an action to jump to this panorama, but only to fetch the data of this panorama. And that's what we are using here effectively for fetching the data to get our stuff retrieved from the Wikipedia server. As you may have noticed it already, we have some other preparations done before here, and I will come now to it, as we need to use the concept of the custom properties extensively here. And I have added 3 of them, and they are to find here in this region. And I have a first name URL is the first custom property, where the Wikipedia address of the article about the first figure. There are sometimes 2, as here we have Janus and Bologna, and we have the first article URL is leading to Janus, the second is to Bologna. It is writing as it is the last part of the Wikipedia URL, the title of the article. And we have a statue image, which is here. All these 3 custom properties are based on strings, and we need to make one thing as a preparation before, and we have a folder named statues, and this needs to be added in our project folder as to be exported as asset. And this is done here in the output section with the panel under advanced assets, and here we need to add a folder, and I have here the statues, and these are the images here. I have taken my own images here because the images in the Wikipedia articles are very inconsistent and not complete for my purpose, so I took the images for myself. During making the panoramas, I made in parallel and made some shots with another camera to have consistent images of the statues on top of my Wikipedia article, so we don't retrieve the images from Wikimedia, but here I'm using my own, and so I need a custom property with an image path here with the title statue images as a custom property for a node. As you can imagine, we have these 3 custom properties only filled with content in the dummy nodes, as they are describing the statues. In the real nodes, we just leaving them empty. As I now have changed something on the status of the project, I have saved it under the suffix _work, and I did the same with the skin, so we have now a proper working version of our status. And I have added the statues folder for the images which are needed to accompany the Wikipedia content in our Wikibox and the skin. So now let's head over to the skin, and we now need some skin variables. You see, we have the user data custom properties already transferred to our skin. It usually happens after setting up the custom properties in the main app of Pano2VR, and if you open the skin after that the first time, then you will be asked whether this should be integrated into the skin as variables, but they are only temporarily available and only under certain circumstances. So this is not a variable globally accessible, but it is only used when it comes to handling a node. And the same is the case if I have hotspots with custom properties. They are another type of these hotspots, and they will be added here also, and so you have this target icon for hotspots. But we need to make them globally available, as we want to transfer the data to JavaScript. This isn't working with this one here out of the box, so we need a part in between, and I'm going to the variables here, and I add 3 variables where the content of these variables of this user data custom properties are transferred to before they are sent to JavaScript. That's the usual procedure. And to shorten it a bit, I am pasting them in. I prepared it somewhere else, and let's say copy, and now I paste it in here, and now we have 4 variables here, and you see they don't have this icon here at source, so they are globally available in the skin in the project. And this is var first name, var second name. They are getting their content from here, and you have the statue image and you have the statue title, which is derived from the user data. As you see here, the statue title is what we have here. I did not retrieve this from Wikipedia because sometimes there are differences between the name of the statue and the data I want to get. Here we have the abduction of Helena. This is a title, official title of the statue, but the article I want to point to is Helen of Troy, or the Helen of the city Troya. And so these are different, so I choose to make my own titles, and the titles here are only needed as a text of the link back to the Wikipedia article. So I'm doing some dispatching here. From the 3 custom properties plus the user data title, I'm transferring them to these global variables here. And in the next step, I need to push them on a hotspot click to make it available to an external function. Now we are adding our first action here in the skin, and it covers the moment, the event, when I'm clicking here on this hotspot. It is a node hotspot, and I want to transfer the data of this dummy node, the user data, the 3 custom properties, and the title. Here it is, the title is abduction of Helena, and I want to have the 3 custom properties, all these 4 parameters. On click, I want to have it transferred to global skin variables. And now it's only happening that the wiki box is opening, and now we want to add it in the skin editor, and I'm going to htnode, and now I have the usual actions we have on such a node. Open next panorama, looking forward because they all have a geographic north. So I'm using forward, so I'm pointing always in the same direction, or looking always in the same direction after node jump. This is a hotspot URL, and open next panorama, pretty much straightforward. We have an asterisk here. We have a logic block on this action. Let's make a double click and examine it. Of course, the node jumps only may happen if we have the tag real. So you can only jump between the real nodes, not between the dummy nodes. So it's okay. And we have this set variable value. It's the same. We have also tags contain statue. And if you click on a statue, then I will open the wiki window here. It is a variable with wiki is true, then this box is shown. So here, if I'm clicking on a next panorama link, I'm changing the node. And here, I'm not changing the node. It stays here, you see, on the map, and it is opening the box. These are the basic interaction functions so far in the skin. Now let's add some more stuff. Saving it, and I'm copying some actions here and throw it into this hotspot template. So paste. We have now a very simple action, which is copying the custom properties as named here as a placeholder, first name URL, and second name and statue image. And here we have the hotspot title to be put into the variable statue title. So these 4 global variables are now filled if I click on a node hotspot. So I save it here. Of course, we cannot see it here because they aren't displayed anywhere. We could check it in the console with some tricks, but I have prepared something for this. To check this variable transfer from the custom properties to global skin variables, on a mouse click here on the node hotspot above the status, we need to check it, but we can see it so far. And I have prepared a nice little tool here in my component library. Let's go to tutorials and add this component to skin, and I called it a debug box. It is just a text box. And if you go here to the element itself, in the text you have a title, and after that you have a variable. You can reconfigure the text for reusing this little text field, and I am using this dollar button here to access my variables, to fill them in here. And now I can see them changing during runtime. I need to save it here, and as I have activated under view live on update on save only, I disabled it so I can have the update immediately after I have changed something in the skin. And here we have it. It is empty now, the variables. If I'm going to the next node, then you see it is putting the node title here, but we won't get the information here at this moment. But when we click on a statue, then we see the title of the statue, the Wikipedia URL title, and we have the file name of the image shown later. In this case, we have two figures in one statue combined. So we have Janus and Bellona with two names and two leading later to two Wikipedia articles and retrieving content of two articles. So this is working. This is a little helper tool here. I like it very much, and it is recommended to throw such stuff into the component library because you need it in every project. And so we have a little bit preparation done here for our project. And now, as we have the content variables, or the variables which are defining the content I want to have from Wikipedia, now we have them available as global variables, and at this stage we can use them in JavaScript functions. In this chapter I want to focus more on the skin and some more setups and preparations before we really can start to program our interface between our Pano2VR project and the data source at Wikipedia. And the box where the Wikipedia content is displayed is located in a Wikipedia container. It is 320 pixels wide and 100% pixels high. We have no modifications. It is always there. And inside we have a box which is 81% high to be covered by the map, because the Wikibox isn't moved or scaled anywhere, while the container of the map is usually 20% when the Wikipedia box is open, and it is 100% when the box is closed. So this wiki is controlling everything here, only one variable. It's very practical. And of course this little button here, the close bar, it sets this wiki to false, and this wiki will set to true if I click on the node hotspot, as you can see it here. That's all. So the interactivity is pretty simple here. And let's go back to the Wikipedia box. This is the content container we need to manipulate. So first action, if you want to manipulate a skin element from outside with JavaScript, is very practical to use CSS classes to make them addressable. There are other ways, but this is a way more simple than everything else. So let's call it Wikibox. And we will come back to this later. Now we have a fixed address where the content is going to. And the next step we want to prepare is we have some dummy content here. And this dummy content, there's a neat trick to do two things in one go, is if the content is arriving from Wikipedia, then the content of this text box will be replaced. And as long as it is not there, I simply display a loading spinner. And this is pretty easy. Let's do this with some code I copy from here to avoid typos and not to bore you with typing. So this is a div inside, and inside this is a class loader. The spinner and the loader are doing some stuff. Let's look how it looks now, and we will. So if I'm clicking on the box, I'm seeing nothing. The trick is this div and this span are formatted with CSS, and in CSS you can add animations to your formatting. And that's a really nice trick I'm using here, and I'm showing it in the next part of this chapter. As I said, this loading spinner is heavily depending on CSS, and I have prepared an external CSS file for using it here in the skin. And as CSS is not the main topic of this tutorial, I just add this as a ready-made CSS for our purpose. And I am introducing a code element, and in version 8 the code elements have a nice new feature. I name it CSS code, and if I'm going to the code element, you see we have the type JavaScript or CSS. This is new. In version 7 you needed to wrap CSS code in kind of a JavaScript comment, so it wasn't really easy to edit this CSS file externally with a professional editor like VS Code or something like that. And this is changed to a tab separation between JavaScript and CSS. Thumbs up for this new feature in version 8. So I check the CSS, and now I simply check from file and grab it now. Here I have it in my library, this lib folder here, and here is custom CSS. And I open it, and you see the CSS code is now in here. And if I open it, you see the CSS file. We will take a closer look later in VS Code because it's better readable there. And I save it, and if I now head over to my project and click on a hotspot, we should see the loading spinner. And the trick is pretty neat here. For this, to explain this, what I've changed in this CSS file, I make a short walkthrough so you can see what this CSS file is doing without constructing it now live in front of you, because it is a little bit boring and we have another focus here. And I am pushing my VS Code window in here, and I shortly make a walkthrough what is in here. I'm using some custom fonts. They are using an assets fonts folder. So what we have to do next here, before I going on to explain what's happening here, I need to add another folder here, and I've prepared a font folder where these fonts I'm referring here are located. They are in the fonts folder. It is on the project root, and there are 5 fonts in it. And if I open it here, it is added to the assets, so it is accessible later in the output folder as assets/fonts. And now I can save it and head over here and go to the VS Code assets fonts. There the fonts are accessible. They are imported here at first. They always need to be on top of a CSS file to be used later. And these are made with the Google Web Fonts helper. I showed it some tutorials ago, but I can just go back here. The Google Web Fonts helper. I just get one font. You can copy the font code here after inserting here assets. It is a typical way for Pano2VR, assets, fonts, and then get this code, just copy it and download the files appropriately, put it in a fonts folder of your project, add it to the assets in your output panel, and you're done. It's pretty easy. And now I have everything prepared here, and if I'm going back to Visual Studio Code, we have 5 fonts introduced here. From the Lato I have a regular, 300 is a thin, and 700 is a bold, and I have for the headlines, I have a Sophia and a Sophia condensed, and we have some for strong, for some types of styling. And here we have the original Pano2VR skin CSS. I changed this to the Lato font from above, and now I added some other stuff, and this is my formatting for the Wikipedia entries. We use it later, and here's a CSS loading spinner. It's a pretty easy trick. We have a container 100% width, and it is a 48 pixels high. You see it here, and I'm with top calculation 50% minus 24. It is exactly in the center vertically, and the loader is simply a square with 48 pixels by 48 pixels. It has a thick 5 pixel wide border. The radius is 50%, so the square turns to a circle, and the border bottom color, so one edge is transparent, the others are gray. So you have a circle which is rotating, and just add the animation. The animation is described here with the add keyframes rule, and it's just turning around. So it is a simple CSS string, no image, no everything. It's done with CSS, extremely low performance issues, and so on. This is a very smart trick to do such a simple loading spinner without using any SVGs or PNGs or animations or something else like that. So if I'm now heading over to the browser and I'm going here, you see this working, and you see now the new fonts are effective. And here, if I'm going to the hotspots here, and even here we have a new font at the map labels, and so the font is working. And usually in skins, if I'm going to the general properties, I kick everything out of here, writing a comment that I have done it here. Otherwise this box is empty, because I like to edit this stuff mainly in a code editor, not within the text boxes of Pano2VR. It's much more convenient, and you have syntax coloring and error checking and so on. And I prefer it very much to do it this way. So I didn't build up this CSS file here, only took a short walkthrough that you know what's happening here, and it's basically some formatting, and added a little neat trick for this loading spinner, and modified the general skin properties here, the general skin rules with my own font, and that's all. Nothing very special. After I've added an external CSS file, I'm doing pretty much the same with JavaScript. Just add a file here and name it JS code. And I'm first adding some external file. First make it exported when I'm rendering the project, jQuery 4.0.0, open. So I integrate it into the output. That's a function of local files. And now I make it available for scripting, so it's loaded into the browser. This is just the export into the output folder, but I need to make it available for my document. And here you can just copy the file name and add it here. So, and let's save it and check it whether it's working. And we now go to the output here, and we can visit the web inspector, hitting the F12 key, and go to network and make a reload. And now we need to check whether we have this jQuery file loaded. Here it is. So everything is fine. It is lying on the root folder. You see it here. And so it is available and loaded. It's not only exported to the output, but it's also already loaded and can be used by JavaScript. And in JavaScript itself, I'm doing the same as I've done with the CSS file before. I'm ticking on from file and opening, and I'm adding just a small JavaScript file. I have prepared it with a basic function just to check whether it's working. So let's save it here and head over to the browser, and we will see what is happening. And if I see the console here, we see it's loaded. That is the same. You will not find a custom JS file here, as the JavaScript is embedded into skin.js, and it is part of this file here. But I have doc-loaded jQuery is working. That's exactly what is happening here in my file. Let's head over to the Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to the custom.js. It's exactly what is happening here. This is a jQuery function which is fired when the document is readily loaded, and it just fires a console message. It's just a simple function check whether everything is working. So custom.js is working, jQuery is working, custom CSS is working as well. And if I'm in the skin editor and under view, I leave this live update on save only unchecked. That's very important. Then every change I'm doing on this JavaScript file and on this CSS file will automatically reload the browser. And that is pretty nice, so you can really fluently working on the CSS and on the JavaScript in your code editor, while Pano2VR in the background updates the whole project and throws it to the browser. So if you're working on the code, you don't need to switch to Pano2VR or the skin editor. The skin editor needs to be open and it needs to be in front, then it's working. And this is a pretty neat improvement in Pano2VR version 8, that we have it separated with JavaScript and with CSS, and both are reacting on hot reload requests if the external files are updated. Now let's start the last chapter of this tutorial, where we really start coding in JavaScript to make our functions working. Let's start with some simple utility, and later we're setting up the connection between the skin and the external JavaScript file. So when I have a look at Visual Studio Code, where I'm doing all my coding, you can use any other coding utility or any other app what's capable of editing text files, whatever you may like. Visual Studio Code is very elaborated, and I recommend it usually, as it has code completion, syntax coloring, and all these convenient stuff you like when you're doing code work. So currently we have in our custom.js the only test function throwing a message into the browser console after the document is loaded, and it is showing us doc-loaded jQuery is working. So we are currently here when we see this output. We just keep it here, and now we are starting to create a little utility I like very much. It saves some typing, and you can disable it at one single line if you don't like all these console outputs. So I'm entering a few lines, and I'm starting to write here with my little function, and I call it very short C, and I add an argument, MSG for message, and then I'm just entering what this function should do, and I'm replacing this console log. I copy it, paste it here, and what is thrown into the console is my argument message. Why I'm doing it? Because I replace from now on every console log command by a simple C. It saves some writing, and if I don't want to have something outputted, I simply can put this line under comments, and no console log will thrown out anymore. So let's save it, and as we have the auto refresh active, because our skin editor is open, it controls and watches this code element, and it controls and watches this part. If anything is changing here, it sends a reload request to the live refresh in Pano2VR. So we can keep open the browser and our Visual Studio Code editor, and we can leave Pano2VR in the background to manage all the stuff here. As soon as I'm changing something here, everything will be updated immediately in the browser via Pano2VR. It's a very convenient feature. The communication between Pano2VR skin and the external JavaScript has two directions. The first direction is the hotspot sends a call to custom.js, and custom.js pushes content into the wiki box. These two directions need to be handled separately. We are starting, of course, with the first one. To make something happen is what is happening exactly when we click on this hotspot here. Okay, it opens the wiki box, and this is working inside of the skin, so we don't need to care about it anymore. But the second one is how to get the content connected to this hotspot into custom.js. And for this we need a function which is then called by a hotspot click here. It makes sense to construct first this function and afterwards call it from the skin. So let's start with this function and we name it open wiki function open wiki, and then we have some brackets and we have some curly brackets for the function body where everything stands in what we want to do. And we have already seen in our inspection of the skin that we have 4 variables. The title, the Wikipedia conform title of the first figure, and of the statue, the short Wikipedia title of the eventual second figure of the statue, then the statue image file name, and the title the whole statue has in our project, which is derived from the user data title. So these 4 variables need to be transferred to custom.js. And when I'm going to my custom.js file, I need 4 parameters, arguments to get this up and running. I'm starting with n1. This is the first name, n2 is the second name, and then we name the image, and after this we name n title. That's the way I have it set up. And to check this, whether it's working, let's enter a console function, and here we are getting all the files, and I say it is n1. Then we have a plus sign for concatenating a string. Then I'm entering some string, some separator. So, and then comes n2, and we have on next concatenation space / space, and we have the image and so on, and we have the last one is n title. So now we should have these 4 parameters we are sending with calling the function open wiki should be thrown into the console. I save it here. We don't need to look at the browser because it's a function, and the function is not called anywhere, so we won't get any result. And now we need to set up this function to be called from within the skin. To call this function from within the skin, we now head over to the skin editor and try to call this function openWiki from the skin, and also submitting these 4 arguments or parameters, as you see here, from the skin to this function. So let's go to the skin editor, and we need this on the click on the node hotspot here, and we add a new function here. To save typing and so on, I have prepared this as a copy and I throw it in via paste, and now I can open it and see with you together what is going on here. I'm doing a double click and you see we have an URL. Posted is a URL click, and you usually use URL clicks to invoke JavaScript functions. If I'm opening it here, you have JS and a colon. As of version 8, you can use JavaScript colon and JS colon as well. So JS is a shorthand now. I appreciate that very much. Not always need to write the whole word JavaScript. And you now call the function OpenWiki. And inside of this function, I now transfer the variables one after another. For this, we have Pano, it is the Pano player as an object, dot get variable value. It is a method, a function inside of the panorama, the player object of the Pano object. And in the brackets behind, there's a string calling this variable name. We repeat it 3 times, so we have 4 variables transferred as parameters of a JavaScript function, and they are derived from the 4 skin variables where I have filled in the custom properties, the user data title, and making it available to this JavaScript function. I hit OK here, and you see there's a logic block engaged here for this function, so that it is not fired everywhere. It is fired only when the node hotspot is a statue. It is not fired when we are walking from one node, one real panorama node in the project to another. So walking in the Palace Park, it is only invoked when we are hitting statue hotspot. That's all. And if I save it, nothing is happening here in the browser. I just switch to the browser. This JavaScript call in the skin should be invoked. Okay, it is invoked, but we get an error. Pano2VR has in version 8 an integrated error console, runtime error overlay. It's a very nice function. It is more or less the same what we see here. And you can pretty much read it at the parameters you see here, EY, EB, and so on. These are internal methods or variables inside of the panorama player. You cannot read very much from it, but the first line is the most important. OpenWiki is not defined, but I have defined it. I know it. It's written here. So what's happening here? If I'm going back to the skin, I have this JS code element, and the code which is inserted here, it doesn't matter whether the code is written in here directly or whether it's taken from an external file. It's the same. And this code I'm entering here, which is in this code window, it will be integrated in the output file skin.js. This JS file builds the skin when the panorama is loaded by the user in the browser, by the visitor. And this JavaScript I'm entered here is simply added to it. So there is a long code chunk of skin.js, and this is only a little part, but it is part of skin.js. And skin.js is, let's say, it is a restricted area, and this JavaScript I'm calling inside of this script is valid inside of skin.js, but not outside. And that is the most important thing here. So I have called a function inside of skin.js, which isn't valid outside, but I need it outside. And so we need to rewrite our custom.js file a little bit and change this function OpenWiki to another definition. And we now have the window object. This is the topmost object we are operating in. And this is a browser window in which the whole project runs. And now I name this function as an object, as a child object of the window. It's a different definition now. And then I write equals function, and the rest stays as it is. And now I'm attaching this open wiki function, not anymore to skin.js, but one level up to the whole window. And this function now is available everywhere, and not only inside of skin.js and inside of the skin object. This is especially important if we are addressing the Pano object. And it is necessary that if you want to access the Pano object, you need to do it from the window scope, from outside. And the window is the topmost level, and from there on you can step into other objects running in this document. And the two we are dealing with are the Pano object, Pano, and the skin object. And if we are elevating the scope, is the correct word for this, if you are elevating the scope one level up to the window, we can access both the panorama and the skin object from now on. This is very important. And now let's check if this fixes the issue. Here we are. We have the first statue. We have the second statue with their short Wikipedia titles. We have the image file name, and we have the title we want to have on top of our wiki box. So this is working now. And this is a very important topic here. If you are dealing with JavaScript, you need to keep in mind the so-called scope. Where is a variable or a function valid and where it is not? And so here we attached the function which needs to communicate with the Pano object from outside the skin object up to the window object, so it can reach out to the Pano object from there and not from within the skin object, what failed as we have seen. As we later need to make a call to the Wikipedia's REST API endpoint, we now need to prepare assembling the call to this point, and we need to fetch some parts of these parameters we have gotten from the skin into an array. Why do we need an array here? Just for practical reasons, we have some statues here which have one figure and others have two figures. So we need to decide what to do there, and the most elegant way and most practical way is to use an array. This array has one item if we have only one figure, and it has two items if we have two figures, and then we can cycle through this array to assemble the call to the REST API. Theoretically, we can even use 5 figures in one statue, but we only need 1 or 2, but we need more than 1. So we need a little bit of workaround to assemble this. I'm making some new free lines here, and I'm trying to build this array. I will call it, let's call it let request. And request will be an array, so it is inside of square brackets, and the part which is always present is the parameter n1. It is the title of the first statue, and it isn't more if we have only this one. And now it's pretty easy, as we have already an array. That's requests, it can be more. And now we have a simple if condition. If we have something, then something happens. And if n2, so the second name, if it is not equal an empty string, then we have something transmitted in n2, and in this case we do the following. We put the array we already have, it is requests, and then it has a method it called push, and push does nothing else then adding an item to an array, and we push n2 into this array. And so the array will remain containing one item if we only have one, but if a second one occurs, then we push it at the end and we have an array with two items. To check what's happening, let's now output this, and let's say it is requests, and so we can check whether this is working what we want to have. So you see the browser has flashed and updated, and let's make a single call. So we have an array with only one position. Don't be worried by two names because they belong together. They are one figure, and here we can see it more prominent. We have only an array with one name, one Wikipedia title, and it is position 0. And now let's click on Mars and Minerva. Then you see we have two separated by a comma, and in this array we have position 0 with Mars and position 1 with Minerva. This is exactly what I want. So now I have prepared an important part for constructing the calls we send to the Wikipedia REST API endpoint. Before we can send a call to the Wikipedia REST API, we need to construct the correct URLs for these calls to get the right content back from them. And for this we need some prerequisites. In between I added some short comments here to make clear what's happening in the little code blocks here, just for remembering it. Commenting is always good, even for self-documenting, and here in this tutorial it's also important to mark up these little blocks to make clear what they are doing in detail. So some prerequisites. The first one we need is to have an image path. So let img path, and this is pretty easy, as we simply need to look in the htdocs folder. If I unfold it, I have the assets folder, which is defined by the settings in output assets. Let's go back here, and under advanced I have the status and the fonts folder, and in the status folder we have the black and white images we are using for the status in the wiki box. These are content coming from us, and here we simply add this path status slash, and this we need to assemble the complete image path to get this image displayed in the wiki box. Status images path, and after this we need to get the base URL of the wiki REST API. Let wiki REST API equals, it is a string as it is a URL. So now let's find out and wind back a little bit to what I've told in the chapter about the basic technical requirements we have here. Go to the browser and open a new tab, and under REST I have my wiki sandbox, and that should lead me here to the Wikimedia REST APIs. Submit, and here we want to have this part where we get the summary of a text. I think it is somewhere else. Maybe it's one point below. So here we are. This is this part here, and we need to get the base path from above. It is en wikipedia.org/API/REST version 1/page/summary, and then it comes the title, and I have set it up here for copying, and I just head over to my cheat sheet and enter it here, and we have https en wikipedia.org ap rest version 1 page summary. And this is needed to put the call to the REST API together with just adding N1 or N2 at the end. So now we have these prerequisites ready here, which we need to assemble all necessary paths we need either for the content coming back from Wikipedia or to show up the images we have already in our folder here. Now we have everything prepared to start building request loop. It is a loop which works one time if I only have N1, and it works 2 times when I have N2 also filled. So let's make a little bit space here, and we are using a jQuery function for it. So I call it request loop, and this loop is set up in a jQuery because it's easier to write. The $sign is a jQuery object, and each is a loop function which cycles through an object as many times as many items it finds inside of this object or array. And now I have a bracket, and inside this bracket there are some parameters expected. First we have the object to cycle through, or the array, and it is requests. So that's the first one. And after this I define a function which makes stuff available inside of this loop, and this function, let's use this, and this function doesn't need to have a name here. It's an unnamed function, but we need parameters, and I'm doing it as a little bit in a simple way for introducing 2 parameters and call them key and value. Every item in an array has a key and a value, and so it is 0 is a key and N1 is a value, 1 is a key and N2 is a value. We will see it soon. And now we have a little function just to check what's happening here, and I just copy it because it is a longer string here for our console output function, and this is what I want to see. The only thing I want to control is this loop running 1 times when I'm calling a statue with 1 figure, and is it correctly calling 2 times when I'm calling a double figure. So now let's save it and head over to the browser. I don't need this Wikipedia stuff anymore. And now if I'm going to a single figure, we see key is 0, value is the title of the figure. The same should happen here. It's key 0, and if I'm clicking on Mars and Minerva, we have key 0, Mars, and key 1, Minerva. So here in this last case, the loop is iterated 2 times. Here is only iterated 1 time. That is exactly what I want to have. And now I can, inside of this part, I can start assembling the call itself. Inside of this request loop, now let's try to build up the complete URLs to prepare the call to the Wikipedia REST API. So I'm adding a new line here, build URL, and let URL equals, and now it is pretty simple. First we need the start path here. It is Wikipedia Wiki REST API as a first part. and then we need the plus sign as a string concatenation. And what we need now is either n1 or n2, which are here now living in the value variable. So copy value, and this should be the correct URL to call the respective endpoint in the Wikipedia REST API. So as it is important, we now need to output it, and we want to have this URL shown in the console. So it is updated, and now let's click on this guy here, and we see now we have an address, and let's click here, address in new window, and here we have now this JSON data we have here, and we have this data I presented earlier when I discussed the API. And here we have everything we need in JSON format. So this is working. And now let's go to the other figure. Just close it here. And now let's go to the Mars and Minerva display here. And now we should get two URLs, and Minerva, open a new tab, and here we have the Minerva article, and let's check the other of Mars, and open a new tab, and here we get an error, but there's a simple, it is not easy to find, but it's a simple error, because the last bracket of the console is omitted by the Firefox browser. If I add it manually here, we have what we want. So now the test result is that the URLs retrieving this content is working. As we now have the most important prerequisite to send out a call to the Wikipedia REST API, we now try to set up this call and to see what this call is delivering. We just checked it in the browser. It was a manual test for the correctness of the URLs, but now we are technically connecting our JavaScript here in custom.js with the Wikipedia REST API. So let's get some new lines here and a comment and build AJAX request. So what is AJAX? AJAX is a short word for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It is a general term for sending a request which is not triggered manually by the user, but by an internal function of JavaScript. So not you with a browser interaction is calling for a data retrieval, but a function or a program is calling for this. And this AJAX is a general term for sending out asynchronous requests which are independent of any user interaction and are triggered by program parts or coding parts, as I'm doing it here now. For this we have a special function, as the call to REST APIs is pretty popular and widespread. jQuery brings a ready-made function for this. It saves us a lot of writing and configuring, and this function has everything built in we need for communication with such a REST API endpoint as we have it here in Wikipedia. So this function simply is named getJSON, and it, in the most simple case as we do it here, it just needs a URL, and just the URL I have placed here. And this function has two parts which are important for us. If this function is successful, then there is a method named done, which is called when the function is ready and has successful done its jobs. And this done contains a function which is called when this is running. And as every function, it needs some curly brackets for the block what's done there. And the function has an argument, which usually in such a case, with in relation to this function, is called data. And this data is what we can see immediately after this function is ready and after the call was successful. So let's show what our console log shows us when we call data from it. And I'm just going ahead. Usually you enter a new line for it, and then we can enter another line which always starts with a dot and which is fail and function, and so we can leave this function without an argument, but we have also here a function block, and here we enter an error message, error loading JSON. If something went wrong, we can provoke it by adding an error to this URL, for example. Then we have this part here and can now look what's happening here if we call all this from this function. So I think he should add a semicolon here and save it, and it should have an intent here. And now let's see what's happening. So drum roll, and we click this one, and voila, we getting some code here. I'm switching to the full console to unfold it, and you see a lot of blue words which are the keys in JSON, and the pink ones or the greens are integers and the pink ones are strings, and we get this stuff we want to have. So we have something like extract at HTML. That's pretty much what we need to use here, and so on. So this is a usable object with some metadata, page ID, or some internal stuff from Wikipedia. You can have a lot of other stuff, and we have the URLs, desktop, edit, page, and so on. So we have usable data in our data object. Is an object, as we see here, and now we can handle the outputs this object is providing to us. As we now have all data we need from Wikipedia, we start building up the content of our Wikibox, which is in fact a HTML chunk, and we can easily assemble this step by step. And so I am adding a comment here, successful loaded, and now assemble content. So what we need first is a variable where we can sum up all these strings we getting out of this Wikipedia data, and this should be an empty string beforehand, and so I'm adding a comment above the loop. It needs to be set up before content assembly variable, and let's name it vbody, and this is empty but defined, so save it. And now we try to build up step by step what we need. And so we have the body, and this the body will be assembled on top of this initializing variable here, and so we add a plus sign, so everything what's right side of this plus equal sign is now added at the end of this variable. So let's start with an h3 variables, and what I'm doing now is I'm working with backticks to simplify the concatenations of the variables we are extracting from this data object here, and the strings we are adding, the HTML tags and other strings we are adding manually here. So I'm using backticks instead of quotes. The concatenation is easier and you can set up it over multiple lines, so it is easier to read and understand. So let's start with an H3 for the headline, and the headline closing tag is /H3, and inside we now need to get something from our data object, and this is simply made by a $sign. And please keep in mind it is different from this $sign. This is a variable placeholder if you are working with backticks, and this is a representation of the jQuery object, so don't mix these two up. And this variable always expects curly brackets after it, and here you can directly address variables or objects or childs of the object. So let's start here with data, and the most important or the simplest child of this data object is title. You imagine it. So we have here a title in the first line, and this is why it is used with backticks. You see, you write HTML code as a string, but the variables are recognized even by Visual Studio Code as the title is a child of this child object of the data object. So we have the titles, and what we can do now is, after the definition, we can monitor what we are doing here with wbody. We check what is happening here. This is the simplest case now, and we should try it here at this stage to check whether it's working. And we now should get the Wikipedia article titles when we click on a statue. So what's happening here? And we get H3 Gaius Mutius Scaevola, and here we get this, it is right, and here we get two of them. That's great. So that is working. Wonderful. And now let's head over to more. And in the finished example, we see here we have, if we click on our hotspots, we have a subtitle after the title. The title will be extended with a link later. Now let's look for this, and for this part. These two text parts are now need to be found, and it is pretty easy. Just take a simple output of our JSON call here, and we just need to fold out it here. I just click on one statue so it's easier. And now let's unfold it. And what I now need is this short form after the title, and this is a key description. This is the next one. And then we have the longer part, which is extract, and extract comes in two flavors here, as a simple plain text, but here it is formatted. Sometimes it is in bold, as you see it here. So there is some simple formatting in here, and we want to have this. And now let's get this to extract HTML and description from the title and put some formatting around it for our output. So now we have here a div. Let's give this div a class with subtitle. This class are referring to styles, which I already have defined in the custom CSS. So we have here some work already done. Just let's put a copy here and have the second one, and the second one is the summary. And this is simple, my identifiers, my class names I added to this part. And now let's just copy this title segment here. And now we need to change the subtitle to description and description. And we have here the summary is extract underscore HTML. Extract underscore HTML. Now let's check this for the correct function. Save, and we get a flashy reload here. And now let's click on it, and we get the H3 headline. We get this short intro with subtitle, and we get this summary including some HTML tags provided by Wikipedia. So this is very nice. And we have now assembled the basic structure of our Wikipedia box content, and we add some more stuff soon to make it complete. So the basic version of our Wikipedia content to be sent to the box in the sidebar in Pano2VR is now ready, but there's something missing. If I compare it to the original finished version here, we want to have one missing thing. I want to have this title, this Wikipedia title, linked to its original article. So if I click here in a new tab, should be the original article in the HTML version and Wikipedia website be opened. So let's add this, and we need the link to be made before I assemble this, so I am adding some space here before, and let's say let link equals, and now we need to find the position where I can find this link in the data object. So let's save it here and have a reload. Okay, we won't have a reload here because it's a server version of the finished project, but here we should have a reload. And if I'm clicking on a statue, I will get this data object here. And now let's unfold it. And we have one position is called content URLs, and there we have two sections, mobile and desktop. For simplicity now I want to have the desktop version, and the correct article is the page version. We don't want to see the discussions or the revisions, and we won't edit this, so page is the correct one. We can check it shorthand here with open URL in new tab whether we will see the right thing. Yes, it is correct. So it is, I keep it open here, it is data dot content underscore URL and then dot desktop and then dot page. This should be the correct link, content URL. Let's cross-check it. Content URL. So where was this typo? So let's fix it. Desktop and dot page. So now we need to build the link behind this title. So it is simple. It is a href, and we have double quotes. You can freely use quotes inside of these backticks. This is one advantage. You can use single and double quotes here because the important container outside to wrap it all together is a backtick. So it's a nice trick to use it. And so here I need just to add this one. And here we have simply the variable link. So without an M. Should make more sense. And we add the target, and this will be underscore blank to open this in a new browser tab. And after the title, we need to close our link tag. And of course, we can insert a break here so it's better readable in our small window here. And this should do the job. And now let's check it, how it is looking in the console output. If I'm clicking on this guy again, we see here we have the title is wrapped in a link tag, and if I'm going here, you open the URL, a new tab, it is working. So now we have added a backlink to Wikipedia from our project, and now the content for one figure retrieved from Wikipedia is ready, and we now need to assemble all this to the whole content of the Wikipedia box here on the side. So the main title is missing and the image is missing, and if I'm clicking on double figure statue, then this is one whole content block with both contents on top of each other. So that is no problem. This is ready, and we only need to wrap up all this to be outputted in this box. It's the last step missing now. When it comes to the assembly of the complete content of the Wikipedia box in the Pano2VR project, we need to keep in mind that we have some delays to obey, because it takes some time to send out the request over the internet to Wikipedia. Getting back, this takes a time. If we have two figures in one statue, then we have the problem that this doubles the time. So we need to make sure that the last part of this is completed with loading before we assemble the rest. So we need a counter. There are some procedures to manage these timing problems with loading external data into a project via JavaScript and AJAX requests and AJAX calls. And pretty simple and easy to understand is an approach to use a simple counter. And before we have the loop running here, on top of this loop, I will set a parameter, which is simply counter, and now we have let I equals 0, and each loop repetition counts it up. So we need to go to the end of this section. When the loading is done, we count this counter up. We don't count failed attempts, only successful attempts. So let's add counter increment, and let's have a very simple function. It is I++, which is a number represented by I counting 1 up, and let's check a display here, and we add a C for our console function, and I show some text, item and I. So this is item and its number, and then I add again something off, and I want to see the maximum count, and for this we have the length parameter, so it is requests dot length, and so we have a display here and can check which item of our requests is just retrieved. And let's add it here, and we have here the Amphion is item 1 of 1, and if we head over to Mars and Minerva, it is item 1 of 2 and item 2 of 2. And so now we can find easily the last iteration of the loop, we have to assemble the content, which may happen on the last iteration when we know the last data chunk is loaded from the REST API, and this is happening in the next part. As we now have a counter, we can easily determine whether it's the last iteration we have while walking through this each loop here. So we can make sure that the content is not assembled before everything is loaded. Don't either it's one or two entries. So let's add a new line here where we need at first a condition. So we have the request length. It is one reason why I built it here, so we can easily compare it. So we have an if condition, so something is happening only under a certain condition, and if I is equal, so we need this bracket, don't delete it, and I, 3 equal signs for JavaScript to make sure it is really exact the same, copy, if I equals the request length. So if I is 1, after being counted up here from 0, so after the first iteration it's 1. If it's a single figure, the condition is true, so the single figure content assembly happens at the end of the first iteration. If it's 2, then we have the length equals 2, and I is 2 after iterated from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 2. So it is always sure that this is on the last iteration. And now let's add a variable. I have added it here already, and I also added the image tag needed for the black and white image in the content box. It's the image source, and it's simply combined by image path with our asset status folders after being exported. And the image, which is the third custom property from our statue node. So this is combined the image path. So these two parts are missing now. WBody is already filled 1 or 2 times. And now let's head over and W out and 2 backticks and a semicolon to have the output prepared. Let's add some space here, and I'm starting with a div and a class, and this one will be named wiki-entry. They are already corresponding to my CSS classes defined in the custom CSS. I'm just adding the closing tag here, and now I'm using an H2 headline. It should be larger than the ones of the Wikipedia articles themselves. And here I'm going to add a variable in my assembly string between the backticks, and it is endTitle, which is transferred via this function from the user data title of the Pano2VR project. Then I need a div where the image is displayed, and inside of this div we only need to combine 2 variables, so $ curly brackets, and we have WEMG for the image on top. And now we add our WBody here, which is the assembled content of 1 or 2 Wikipedia articles. So this should be it. And of course I have made an error here, so this needs to be put between the div tags, and this is my div. Let's say wiki content, and this should be okay for now. And I would like to see it in the console to check everything before we are really outputting it. wout. And if I didn't made a mistake, this should work. So let's try this one. And this looks pretty nice. We have a div tag here, we have an h2 tag here, we have div wiki content, one div closing, another div closing from the both here. It should be okay this way. Now let's check a double entry, and we have wiki entry as a container, h2, then we have content with an image, and then we have h3 with an article, another h3 with an article, and closing with two closing divs. It looks pretty nice. Hopefully this works. And now we have one little thing to do, and this is just to push it into our box in the left sidebar. And this is pretty easy. We're using jQuery for this, so we have the $sign, and now we are addressing directly the text box inside of our skin element. So let's head over to the skin editor, and the wiki box we have already assigned the class .wikibox. And keep in mind, if you have a text element, you have an outer div, and we have an inner element, and so we need to address it properly when pushing the content into it. So it is a .wikibox dash box, and then we need a larger sign and a greater sign to address directly the containing div, and this gets a property, and this property is HTML, which represents the content of this box, and it can be read and written. And so now let's push this wout into this HTML box. So hopefully this should do the job. So now let's check it and head over to the browser and check this Amphion, and here we are. Everything is displayed correctly in our box on the side here, and let's swap it, and this content is now retrieved from Wikipedia. Below the image, everything here is from Wikipedia. This is my own image from the assets folder. This comes from the user data title. We also see here if we head over the hotspot. And now let's check the double entry here, Mars and Minerva. First is Minerva, then we have Mars, and the links to the articles should work accordingly. So this is done now. So we have a really nice data retrieval now from Wikipedia into our Pano2VR project. And just to recap this step, which was a little bit more complex, just in a few words per section here, we have a function called from the node hotspot, and this is triggered exclusively if you click a statue node hotspot, not a real panorama hotspot. We building up the function on top of these 4 parameters, which are transferred from skin variables. And we build up a request array so we can work on it in a loop if necessary. And we have some prerequisites with some path, the folder for the images, and some variables to fill up with content, or some code chunks like the image here, which can be assembled beforehand. And we have a counter to determine the last iteration of the loop now, which follows now. And the loop cycles through our request array to make sure that double entries are processed properly. And now we're building the request URL, and the request URL is fed into the get JSON function from jQuery. And if it's successfully done, the function inside of the done part of this process is processing the data object which we get from Wikipedia, and there we can find various content chunks and parameters like the URLs or the descriptions or a summary in already formatted as HTML, as well as a title, and we can assemble it 1 or 2 times. In our case, we have a counter to determine the last iteration, and if the last iteration happens, we wrap all the Wikipedia articles which are already live in WBody together with the headline and image into one image, and this image is pushed into the text box in the skin editor with named and classified with Wikibox. And that is the whole process, and I hope it is understood in detail here, because it is very important to check this for other applications where the same procedure is very useful to retrieve arbitrary external data into another web project. So in our case, from Wikipedia to a Pano2VR project in the browser, not in the application, but in the browser at runtime. And this is a procedure for retrieving the content into our text box here on the site. There are only a very few topics left to discuss at the end, but this is the end of the most important part, the complete process of data retrieval from a REST API endpoint. In all processes with external data retrieval, which are set up like ours here, we have to handle delays and waiting times for the content to being successfully retrieved. So we need to keep in mind that parts of our project aren't loaded as fast as it is here in our local development environment, which is pretty fast. And Wikipedia usually delivers data also pretty fast because they have a very nice infrastructure for their servers. But you cannot rely 100% on this, so you need at least to show your user when something has to be awaited for. And let's provoke some delays here. I'm going into my project here, and if I'm going to the first figure, it is immediately loaded because the image comes from my computer, and this content from Wikipedia is extremely fast because it's using this compact JSON code, so you won't see any significant delay. And you remember the loading spinner I have built in at the beginning, and we may make this now a little bit useful. So I'm heading over to the network tab in my web developer tools, and I can add some parameters to simulate more real life experience. I'm keeping the cache enabled, so the image retrieval may be cached, all our images, and I will focus on external content. So I'm adding here a throttling. And usually a good testing point is about 2 megabit per second, which is DSL line here. And now let's do something to test it. And I'm going to node where I haven't retrieved Wikipedia content before. So let's say we are going to Asclepius. So now you see the statue I've seen before, or I've clicked before, was still in this box, and after a while the new content is appearing. Let's check it. We have Asclepius here, which is attached to this statue. So let's head over to Ceres, and now I'm clicking right now. You see there was a little delay, not very much, but visible. You see the image loading a little bit slower because also local files are throttled down to a certain speed. And now I'm trying Heracles, and the same. But there may be a delay, and we may have the situation where old stale content is, here you see it very significant. Hercules from the node before is standing very long in the box before the content of the just clicked priestess occurs here. So we need to deal with this delay, And what we at least can do is to signalize the user, okay, wait, so we need to reinstall our loading spinner here. And at least we should make sure that if you are entering a new node or entering new content, that the old content is cleared here. And for this, we will introduce a little function which does exactly this job. So now I'm going to the custom.js again, and I'm adding a new function below our function we had before. And this function is also attached to the window object, window dot, and I'm naming it clear wiki. And this is a function. It doesn't need any arguments, so we are just done with this container here. And now it's pretty easy. And we are doing just the opposite. Basically, we can copy this line where we push the generated content into the Wikibox text element in the skin, just copy it, paste it here, and we just kick out the W out and add a new string let spinner. And now I will add some HTML code. I just copy it, or I can copy it from the skin pretty easily. Text, this is the original code, and we just restore it. So if we clear it, we just overwrite the Wikipedia article with the old spinner HTML. That's what we need here. And I just add the spinner here, add the HTML content, and let's add a little message so that we see it's happening. Clear wiki content. So we have also a message in the console for it. So let's add a K for it for completeness. So, and now let's try it again. I'm going to the browser and it loads pretty slowly. I'm doing a force reload here to clear the cache, which was Command Shift R or Control Shift R on the PC. And now everything is loaded freshly over a simulated 2 megabit line. So it needs some time. And here we go. So also the map tiles are loaded slowly. So let's go to this guy here. And now we see the loading spinner and the content is loaded. And if I head over to the next one, okay, the loading spinner was shortly flashing. Usually it is better to go to another node and now invoke the loading of the Wikipedia article, but we have forgotten one thing. You have seen that the old content from the node before was still visible here because this function is defined here, but I never called it anywhere. So simple as that. I copy it and we only need to add this function at the beginning of the OpenWiki function. Before I do anything here, I'm clearing out clear old content, add the clear wiki function, and everything is fine. So just to wipe out everything, and now it should work. I have a reload. So wait for a moment. So now let's check Flora. It's loading, then it's there. Now let's check her neighbor. You have seen there was a short flash of the loading spinner. Let's move to the next node and head over to Heracles. We have a loading spinner. The contents comes in, and let's get Perseus. You have seen a short loading spinner. And so it works. So we have a clear up of our content before the next content is loaded. It's more clean. It makes it clear for the user that there is something loaded and that he needs to wait for a moment. And it is a better usability and it's better understandable for the user when he does his interaction. So no throttling. I turn it off now. And now it is, usually you won't see it. If you have a pretty good motorized server, you won't see the spinner very long or maybe not at all. So now the project is finished and we have done everything that we get external Wikipedia content loaded as a description of our statues here in the Schönbrunn Palace Garden. As this is a pretty large and complex tutorial, I give you a short wrap-up over the whole project in very short steps to make it clear how it is basically working and how the basic structure of this project is set up. And let's start with the Pano2VR main application. We have some real-life panoramas on the one hand, and we have some dummy panoramas which are working with a very small white dummy JPEGs, and all the nodes have user data with 3 custom properties applied, and we have here 3 properties which aren't used at the real-life panoramas, but at the dummy panoramas we have added here the name, the first name of the figure in a statue with a second name optional, and we have an image URL and we have a user data title, and these 4 parameters are sent to a JavaScript to retrieve the content for this respective statue. The statues are represented by dummy nodes. They are geolocated and elevated by 6 meters numerically, so they are initially placed pretty much at the right point, but only the real life points are shown on the map in the skin, and that's everything we have in the main application. And if we head over to the skin, we have the map container and the map pin. The map pin has an appearance, it only shows real panoramas, no dummy panoramas, and I need to add here the usage of tags. You see the green tag is _real and the blue tag is _statue, and these tags decide whether it appears on the map or not, whether it's clickable. So a node hotspot here doesn't invoke a jump, but it does invoke a jump if you are going to the real node. And if we head over here to the skin again, we have the node hotspot is transferring the custom properties and the user data title into 4 skin variables. Then the most important function is the skin. It transfers these 4 variables as parameters to an external function called OpenWiki. And of course, it only works with a statue node hotspot. So this is everything we need to do here in the skin. Then we come to the code integration. We have an external CSS file which is embedded as a code element in the skin, and it is replacing the default CSS which is attached to the skin itself and added with some other stuff, including some custom fonts and some formatting for the Wikipedia content box and the little loading spinner entirely made by CSS and the CSS animation. The most important part is jQuery and JavaScript block. We are adding jQuery 4 here, and it is loaded into the project, and here it is made available. And then we have a custom script, custom.js, which is also embedded externally and edited in Visual Studio Code and then integrated into the skin. And that's everything we have here. We have a debug box. It was a component, and while we are just here, make it invisible and I'm usually moving it out of scope, but we can leave it here, make it invisible. and it doesn't take much performance and space in the code. And so this was the skin and a Pano2VR main app part. And now let's head over to Visual Studio Code. Here's the CSS file again, and there's nothing special in it. And we have the main part, the engine of the whole project, which is custom.js. Custom.js has convenience function for outputting to the console. It is easy. One advantage is just comment it out, and if I'm now heading over to the browser, nothing is talking here anymore. And now we are going to a new hotspot. Everything is working, but no display here at all. Only one point in the code to disable it. And the main function we are working on is OpenWiki, and we need to attach it to the window to avoid scope issues, as we are operating with code inside of skin.js, but we need to make it available globally in the window object. So we need this construction to define the function. Here we have the 4 parameters we get from the skin, and before we are adding content to the text element in the skin, we clear it up from older content with another function at the end, and then we generate a request array to work in a loop to send 1 or 2 requests for one statue to Wikipedia REST API. We're defining some passes and code chunks here, and then we are starting with a loop, which is looping through the requests to make sure that one request is properly processed, as well as 2 or even more if you like. The main engine to retrieve the content is the jQuery function getJSON. It only needs a URL, and it has 2 methods which are invoked when it's done successfully or if it's failing. The failing is easy. And here we have inside of this done section, we call a function on the data object, which is returned from this function from outside. And then we can handle through an object architecture to find all these content parts in the Wikipedia JSON object, which is returning from them. We assemble this to body objects, 1 or 2, very simple, just HTML code and some variable placeholders combined inside of these backticks to assemble larger strings in JavaScript. Then we have a counter to manage the succession of the 2 parts, and only on the last part we assemble the whole content with a headline and the image and the before assembled body part, and then it is pushed with this line out to the skin text element. And at least we have a little clearing function which reinstalled the HTML code for the little loading spinner, which is a default content in the skin when we install it, which is fixed here, but this will be replaced when the first content from Wikipedia comes, and the clear wiki function replaces it with the default content. That's all. So that's a short wrap-up of the whole function, and it is a blueprint for using external content where you shoot out a call via JavaScript, most convenient with the jQuery function getJSON, but there are other ways too to retrieve content and get a data object back, which is formatted as a JSON object, where you can easily pick up content for your purposes as you like. And this connection between this Pano2VR project and the Wikipedia REST API is a simple but hopefully instructive example to get a connection between these parts of content and presentation. And it has a lot of advantages, and you can extend it to many other use cases. And it is widespread in the web. It's an often used technology to combine an external data or database with content already living in your browser, and you can make endless variation of this topic. And I hope this tutorial showed how this basically works. So we are at the end of episode number 6 of the tutorial series about extending Pano2VR with JavaScript. and I hope this series has given you a good overview and a solid foundation for your own experiments and for your own projects to push the limits of the rich feature catalog Pano2VR already has, and to make projects more complex and more challenging, and give you the opportunity to meet even advanced requests of your clients.